I'm Evangeline LaRue, 24 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed family loyalty meant everything. Then my mother's words at our dining room table changed my entire world. You will annul this marriage immediately, or you're no longer my daughter. What she didn't know is that I had been financially supporting Luka's writing dreams for 6 months, believing in his talent when no one else would. My mother's ultimatum still echoes. Choose him or choose your family. You cannot have both. What they didn't understand was that Luka wasn't just my husband. He was the first person who saw me as Evie, not just the LaRue heiress. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. My secret marriage wasn't the first time a LaRue woman had defied the family for love. How far would my family go to bury the truth about their own forbidden past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The LaRue mansion sits on Forsyth Park like a wedding cake someone forgot to finish decorating. 3 stories of antebellum grandeur, with columns that reach toward Spanish moss and secrets that burrowed deep into Savannah's red clay soil. I've lived here my entire life, except for 4 glorious years at art school in New York where nobody cared about my last name or expected me to wear pearls to breakfast. That morning in June, I stood in my studio, the converted carriage house behind the main estate, mixing titanium white with the faintest hint of cadmium yellow. The light filtering through the tall windows caught the paint on my palette knife, and for a moment, everything felt possible. My canvas stretched before me, blank and waiting, the way I wished my life could be. Evie, darling, your coffee's getting cold. Mama's voice drifted from the main house, carried on the humid air that made everything in Savannah feel thick and slow. Like moving through honey, I set down my brush and walked across the cobblestone courtyard, past the fountain that had been dry for 3 years since Daddy died. The house felt different without him, emptier, but also more suffocating. Mama had filled the silence with expectations and social obligations, as if keeping busy could somehow preserve what we'd lost. The kitchen smelled of magnolia and melted butter, remnants of Dolores's biscuits from earlier. Dolores had been our housekeeper since before I was born, and she understood the rhythms of this house better than any of us. She knew when to appear with sweet tea and when to make herself scarce. I thought we'd have lunch at the club today, Mama said, not looking up from her newspaper. The Savannah Morning News was spread across the marble countertop like a map of everything she needed to control. Margaret's engagement announcement is in the society pages. I poured myself coffee from the silver pot that had been in our family for 4 generations. Everything in this house had history, weight, significance. Sometimes I felt like I was drowning in ancestry. I can't today, Mama. I'm meeting someone. Her perfectly manicured fingers paused over the newsprint. Delphine LaRue had never been caught off guard by anything in her 49 years, but lately, I've been providing her with new experiences. Meeting someone? Who? This was the moment I should have told her about Luka. Should have explained that I'd been sneaking away to Griffin tea and coffee for months, that I'd fallen in love with a man who made his living serving lattes to tourists and wrote stories that made me cry. Should have mentioned that we'd been married for 2 weeks at the courthouse, with only Talia as our witness dot instead. I said, just a friend from art school. Mama's smile was sharp as cut glass. You know, darling, your daddy always said that. Art was a lovely hobby, but it shouldn't interfere with real life. Real life. As if what I did with paint and canvas wasn't real. As if the hours I spent trying to capture the way sunlight moved through Spanish moss, or the exact shade of melancholy that settled over the squares at twilight didn't matter. I need to go, I said, kissing her cheek. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and disappointment. The walk to downtown Savannah usually took 20 minutes, but I stretched it to 30, needing the time to shed the weight of the mansion. With each block, I felt lighter, more myself. The tourists, with their cameras and guidebooks, the street musicians playing for tips, the college students sprawled in squares. This was the Savannah I loved. Messy and alive and unconcerned with bloodlines. Griffin tea and coffee occupied the ground floor of a converted 19th century pharmacy. The original tin ceiling and exposed brick walls created a space that felt both historic and timeless. I discovered it during my first week back from New York, desperate for somewhere that didn't feel like home. Luka was behind the counter, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked the espresso machine. He had hands that looked like they belonged to a pianist or surgeon, precise, careful, capable of creating beautiful things. When he looked up and saw me, his whole face changed. That smile was mine now, legally and completely. "The usual, Mrs. Morrow?" he asked quietly, and my heart did that thing it had been doing for weeks, skipping. Like a stone across water. Mrs. Morrow. I was still getting used to it. We decided to keep it secret until we figured out how to tell our families, though Luka's family situation was complicated in different ways than mine. He'd aged out of foster care at 18 and had been building his life piece by piece ever since. I nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. The afternoon crowd was mostly tourists and college students. Nobody who would recognize me or care about LaRue family business. He made my drink, a lavender latte with oat milk, and handed it over with a folded piece of paper hidden beneath the cup. Our secret communication system, born from weeks of stolen conversations and careful courtship under Savannah's watchful eyes. I found a corner table and unfolded the note. His handwriting was neat, controlled. Published another story. But Kenyon, review wants to see more of my work. Can you believe it? I wrote back quickly. I can. I've always believed in you. This was our dance notes passed like high school sweethearts, stolen glances across the cafe, conversations disguised as customer service. It should have felt ridiculous for a 24-year-old woman, but the LaRue name came with surveillance. Mama had friends everywhere, and gossip traveled through Savannah society faster than kudzu dot. When a shift ended at 3, we walked to Forsyth Park and found our usual bench under the oak trees. This was where he'd first told me he loved me, where I'd admitted that I'd never felt like myself until I met him. I got an email from a literary agent, he said, pulling out his phone. She read the story in the Kenyon Review and wants to see my novel. I grabbed his hand, not caring who might see. Luka, that's incredible. This could change everything. He was quiet for a moment, watching a family of tourists pose for photos in front of the fountain. It might mean moving, he said finally. New York, maybe. Or Portland. Somewhere with more opportunities. The words hung between us like Spanish moss, beautiful and slightly ominous. I thought about my studio, my half-finished paintings, the life I'd been building here. Then I thought about Mama's expectations, about lunch at the club and society page announcements, and the slow suffocation of being a LaRue. Then we'll move, I said. Your family. My family will have to understand. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The LaRues didn't understand anything that threatened their vision of how things should be. We'd been in Savannah for 5 generations, our roots as deep and tangled as the live oaks. Leaving wasn't just geography. It was betrayal. That evening, I sat in my studio mixing colors for a new painting. I've been working on a series one called Breathing Room, abstract pieces that captured the feeling of space, of possibility, of air filling your lungs after holding your breath for too long. The painting I'd started that morning was mostly whites and yellows with hints of blue creeping in from the edges. I thought about Luka's news, About the possibility of leaving Savannah, about the note I'd hidden in my jewelry box alongside my wedding ring. We'd agreed to keep the marriage secret for a few more weeks, just until we figured out the right way to tell everyone. But secrets in my family didn't stay buried long. The carriage house door opened, and Uncle Beckett appeared carrying 2 glasses of bourbon. He lived in the guest house on the far side of the property, maintaining just enough distance from the main house to avoid Mainham's daily dramas. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me a glass. Uncle Beckett had been the family black sheep for as long as I could remember, though nobody ever explained exactly what he'd done to earn that status. "Thanks." I accepted the bourbon gratefully. Uncle Beckett understood the weight of being a LaRue in ways that Mama never seemed to. "Your Mama's been asking questions about where you disappeared at every afternoon," he said, settling into the old armchair I kept in the corner for visitors. "Let her ask, Evie." His voice was gentle but serious. "I know what it's like to want something your family doesn't approve of. Sometimes the cost is higher than you expect." I studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth turned down at the corners. Uncle Beckett had never married, never had children, never seemed to want anything beyond his books and his bourbon and his careful distance from LaRue expectations. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Why does Mama treat you like a cautionary tale?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a story for another day. Right now, I'm more worried about your story." I took a sip of bourbon, feeling it burn down my throat. "What if I told you I was thinking about leaving Savannah? I'd say it's about time. But I'd also say your Mama won't make it easy. What if I told you I'd already made choices she won't approve of?" Uncle Beckett was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he raised his glass in a small toast. I'd say welcome to the family tradition of disappointing expectations. We drank in comfortable silence as the sun set over Savannah, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, I'd go back to the main house for dinner, where Mama would ask careful questions and I'd give careful answers. We'd eat Dolores's pot roast and discuss Margaret's engagement, and pretend that everything was exactly as it should be. But here in my studio, with Uncle Beckett's understanding presence and the smell of oil paint and bourbon mixing in the humid air, I felt like myself. I felt like Evie Moreau, artist and wife and woman with choices to make. Tomorrow I'd meet Luka at the cafe again. We'd pass notes and steal glances and plan our future in whispered conversations. We'd talk about New York and literary agents, and the possibility of a life bigger than what either of us had imagined. What I didn't know was that tomorrow would be the day our secrets stopped being secret, that Mama's careful questions would become direct accusations, and that the LaRue family's talent for keeping secrets would finally meet its match in there. Talent for destroying anything that threatened their carefully constructed world. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my studio door slamming open. Mama stood in the doorway like an avenging angel and Lily Pulitzer, her face a mask of controlled fury that I'd seen maybe 3 times in my entire life. "Get dressed," she said. "We need to talk." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. "Mama, what now, Evangeline?" She used my full name like a weapon, each syllable sharp enough to cut. I pulled on yesterday's clothes and followed her across the courtyard to the main house, my bare feet cold against the cobblestones. The morning air was thick with humidity and something else. The electric feeling that comes before thunderstorms dot in the formal living room. I found Margaret sitting primly on the antique sofa, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. My cousin had always been Mama's favorite, the daughter she wished she'd had instead of me. Next to her sat a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, expensive handbag, the look of someone who made her living from other people's business. "Sit down," Mama said. I remained standing. What's going on? Margaret opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. This came to my attention yesterday evening. She handed me a photograph, black and white, slightly grainy, obviously taken from a distance. It showed me and Luka at the courthouse 2 weeks ago, me in the simple white dress I'd bought at Anthropology, him in his only good suit. We were kissing on the steps, my left hand visible with its simple gold band dot, my stomach dropped to somewhere around my ankles.
Who is he?
Mama's voice was deadly quiet. I looked at the photograph again, at our faces bright with joy and hope. The photographer had captured the moment right after the ceremony, when we'd stepped into the Charleston sun as husband and wife. We'd been so careful, so sure that nobody we knew would see us there. His name is Luka Moreau, I said finally.
And we're married.
The words hung in the air like incense, heavy and impossible to take back. Margaret made a small noise of satisfaction, as if she'd won a bet. The stranger private investigator, I realized, now remained silent. Mama closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, she looked older, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. How long?
2 weeks.
And you thought you could keep this?
From us indefinitely?
I lifted my chin, channeling every ounce of LaRue's stubbornness I'd inherited. I thought you'd try to stop us. Of course we would have stopped you, Margaret exploded. Evie, do you have any idea what you've done? Who is this man? What's his family? What does he do?
He's a writer.
He works at a coffee shop, the investigator said quietly. Griffin tea and coffee? He makes $11 an hour plus tips. He has no family, no assets, no college degree. He aged out of foster care in Charleston and has lived in 7 different cities in the past 10 years. Each fact hit like a physical blow, not because they were untrue, but because of how they sounded when stripped of context and love. Luka's resilience became transience. His independence became instability. His talent became irrelevant. He's not after your money, I said desperately. He doesn't even know about the trust fund. Mama laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Oh, sweetheart, of course he knows. Everyone in Savannah knows about the LaRue Trust Fund. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Mama stood up, smoothing her skirt. You've been seduced by a con artist who saw an opportunity and took it. It happens to the best of families. That's not true. Then prove it, Margaret said. Have the marriage annulled. If he really loves you, he'll understand that you need time to be sure. And if he doesn't agree to the annulment? Mama asked softly. Margaret and the investigator exchanged a look. Then we'll know what he was really after. I felt the room spinning around me, all the careful certainties of my life suddenly uncertain. 2 weeks ago, I'd married the man I loved in a simple ceremony. That felt like the first honest thing I'd ever done. Now my family was dissecting that choice like pathologists examining a corpse. I won't annul my marriage, I said. Yes, Mama said, you will. You can't make me, can't I? She reached into her purse and pulled out a sheaf of legal documents. As of this morning, your trust fund is frozen. Your credit cards are canceled. Your allowance is suspended. The studio lease is in my name, so that's gone too. I stared at the papers, understanding flooding through me like ice water. You can't do this. I can do whatever is necessary to protect this family. You have 24 hours to file for annulment. If you don't, you'll be cut off completely. No money, no family, no home. Mama, choose him or choose your family, Evangeline. You cannot have both. The ultimatum hung between us like a sword. I thought about Luka at the cafe, probably wondering why I hadn't shown up for my usual afternoon visit. I thought about the email from the literary agent about our plans to move somewhere bigger and brighter. I thought about the painting I'd been working on, left half finished in a studio I apparently no longer had access to. "You're my daughter," Mama continued, her voice softening slightly. "I love you more than life itself, but I will not watch. You destroy yourself for some man who sees dollar signs when he looks at you. He's not some man. He's my husband."
A husband you've known for what, 6 months?
"A husband you felt the need to marry in secret? If this relationship was real, you would have brought him home, introduced him properly, given us a chance to know him." The terrible thing was, part of me wondered if she was right. Had I kept Luka's secret because I was protecting our love, or because deep down I knew my family would see through him? Had I been naive, the sheltered little rich girl falling for the first man who paid attention to her? "I need to think," I said.
Of course you do.
Mama's voice was gentle now, understanding. "You have until tomorrow evening. Margaret will drive you wherever you need to go. I can drive myself. Your car is registered in my name. I've had it towed." I looked around the room at Margaret's satisfied expression, at the investigator's professional detachment, at Mama's carefully controlled sorrow. Everything I counted on, everything I'd taken for granted, had been stripped away in the span of 15 minutes. Where am I supposed to stay? "Your room is exactly as you left it," Mama said. "You're not a prisoner, Evie. You're a daughter who needs to come to her senses." I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom on unsteady legs. The room was a museum of my former self-dance recital trophies, academic awards, photographs from cotillion and charity galas. Everything pink and pristine and perfectly arranged, like a life someone else had chosen for me. I sat on the bed and called Luka. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hey, beautiful. I was wondering where you were yesterday." His voice made my chest ache. I closed my eyes and tried to memorize the sound of it, the way he said my name like it was something precious. "Luka, we need to talk. What's wrong? Can you meet me?"
Tonight? Of course, where?
I looked around my pink prison at the security cameras I never noticed before mounted in the corners.
I'll come to you. What's your address?
He lived in a converted garage apartment behind a house near the SAG campus. The neighborhood was a mix of art students and young professionals, the kind of place where nobody cared about family names or social standing. I walked the 2 miles from Forsyth Park, grateful for the darkness and the time to think. His apartment was small but warm, filled with books and houseplants and the smell of coffee. A desk by the window held his laptop and neat stacks of manuscript pages. This was where he'd been writing the stories that were going to change our
lives. Evie, what happened?
He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself stay there for a moment, breathing in the scent of his skin. Then I told him everything. The photograph, the investigator, the ultimatum. I watched his face change as I spoke, saw the moment he understood what we were up against. "They want you to annul our marriage," he said finally. "Yes, and if you don't, I lose everything. My family, my money, my home." He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the street below. When he looked back at me, his expression was carefully neutral. "Maybe they're right," he said. "What? Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we should have waited, done things properly. Luka, no, we did things honestly. We married because we love each other, not because my family approved. But what if I am taking advantage of you? What if I am the kind of man who sees an opportunity and takes it?" "Stop." I grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at me. "You're not." "I know you're not. How can you be sure? You've never been poor. Evie, you've never had to choose between rent and groceries. Never had to sleep in your car because you couldn't afford a deposit on an apartment. Maybe the investigator is right. Maybe I do know more about your family's money than I've admitted. Do you? Of course I do. Everyone in Savannah knows about the LaRue Trust Fund. But that's not why I married you. Then why? Because you see, me. Because when you look at me, you don't see foster kid or barista or charity case. You see Luka. You see the person I'm trying to become. I kissed him then, tasting salt tears mine or his. I couldn't tell. Then we fight for this. We fight for us. Against your family? Evie, they have resources, connections, power. What do we have? Each other. He smiled sadly. That's not enough to live on. It has to be. But as I walked back to the mansion that night, I wondered if he was right. Love was a luxury for people who could afford it. Without my family's money, I was just another struggling artist in a city full of them. Without my family's support, I was nobody. The house was dark when I returned, but I knew Mama was awake, waiting for my decision. I climbed the stairs to my room and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine a future where I chose love over legacy. By morning, I still didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew that whatever choice I made, I'd be living with the consequences for the rest of my life. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I spent the morning pacing my childhood bedroom like a caged animal, my phone buzzing with increasingly frantic texts from Talia. My best friend had an uncanny ability to sense disaster from 3 states away. Girl, what's happening? You've gone radio silent and my spidey senses are tingling. I finally called her back around noon after Mama had made 3 separate trips upstairs to check on me and bring increasingly elaborate peace offering sweet tea, leftover pralines, fresh flowers from the garden. They know, I said without preamble. Know what? Talia asked, then immediately answered her own question. Oh shit. The marriage? Margaret hired a private investigator. They have photos. Photos of what? You two holding hands. Scandalous. Photos of us at the courthouse, in wedding clothes, kissing like newlyweds. Talia was quiet for a moment. Well, damn, what's the family doing about it? I told her about the ultimatum, the frozen accounts, the 24-hour deadline. As I spoke, I could hear her moving around her tattoo shop, probably cleaning equipment while she processed the information. So let me get this straight, she said finally. They want you to choose between your family's money and your husband. Yes. And you're calling me because ... Because I don't know what to do. Bullshit. Talia, you know exactly what to do. You're just scared to do it. I sat down on my bed, surrounded by the detritus of my privileged childhood. What if they're right? What if I am just some naive rich girl who got taken in by the first guy? Who paid attention to her? Are you serious right now? I've never had to support myself. I've never even had a real job. What if I can't make it without my family's money? Then you'll figure it out. Like millions of other people do every single day. Easy for you to say. You've been independent since you were 8. Because I had to be. My parents kicked me out when I got my first tattoo, remember? I slept on couches and worked double shifts and ate ramen for dinner for 2 years straight. And you know what? I survived. I'm actually proud of what I built. I thought about Talia's shop, small but successful, filled with her own artwork and the satisfaction of work she'd chosen. Then I thought about my former studio, with its expensive easels and premium paints, all paid for by money I never earned. What if Luka really is after my money? Is he? I don't think so. But how can I be sure? Because you know him. Because you've spent months getting to know him as a person, not as a bank account. Trust your instincts, Evie. After I hung up, I walked downstairs to find Mama in the sunroom deadheading roses with surgical precision. She looked up as I approached, hope flickering across her face. Have you made your decision? I need more time. The deadline is tonight. Then extend it? Evie, Mama, please. I need to understand why you're doing this. It's not just about Luka, is it? She set down her pruning shears and looked out at the garden Daddy had planted for her 25 years ago. What do you mean? This level of surveillance, the private investigator, freezing my accounts within hours of finding out, this is bigger than just disapproval of my choice in men. Mama was quiet for a long moment. Your father and I worked very hard to build something lasting for you. The LaRue name means something in this town, in this state. It opens doors, creates opportunities, provides security. I understand that. Do you? Because throwing it all away for a man you've known for 6 months suggests otherwise. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm making choices about my own life. Your life is connected to this family, whether you like it or not. Your choices affect all of us. I studied her face, looking for clues about what she wasn't saying. What happened to Uncle Beckett? The question caught her off guard. What does Beckett have to do with anything? You treat him like he's contaminated? He lives in exile on his own family's property. What did he do that was so terrible? That's not your concern. If I'm about to be exiled too, I think it is my concern. Mama picked up her pruning shears again, but her hands were shaking slightly. Beckett fell in love with someone inappropriate. Someone who didn't belong in our world. It ended badly for everyone involved.
How badly?
Badly enough that we learned the importance of preventing such mistakes before they destroy everything we've worked to build. The pieces were starting to come together. Uncle Beckett's warning about the cost being higher than expected, his understanding of wanting something the family didn't approve of, his careful distance from LaRue expectations. Who was she? It doesn't matter. She's gone now. Mama, the past is the past, Evangeline. What matters is the future. Your future. That afternoon, I walked to the carriage house to collect my painting supplies. The building felt empty without. My canvases and easels, like a stage after the final curtain. I found Uncle Beckett sitting on the steps, smoking a cigarette and reading a worn paperback. Packing up? He asked. Mama says the lease is in her name. It is, but that doesn't mean you can't negotiate. I sat down beside him, breathing in the familiar scent of tobacco and old books. Tell me about her. Who? The woman you fell in love with. The inappropriate one? Uncle Beckett was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he closed his book and looked at me with eyes that held decades of carefully buried pain. Her name was Catherine. She was a nurse at the hospital where I did my residency. You were a doctor? I was going to be pediatric surgery. I had a fellowship lined up at Johns Hopkins, plans to specialize in heart defects in children. I was going to save lives. What happened? I fell in love with a woman whose father was a plumber and whose mother cleaned houses. Sweet, intelligent, kind everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. But not what the family had planned for the heir to the LaRue medical dynasty. So you chose her. I tried to choose both. Brought her home for Christmas, thinking if everyone just met her, they'd understand. But your grandmother took one look at Catherine's department store dress and drugstore jewelry and decided she was a gold digger. Was she? Uncle Beckett smiled sadly. Catherine didn't even know about the money until she walked into this house. She thought I was just another resident, scraping by on hospital food and student loans. What did the family do?
Everything they could think of.
They had her investigated, threatened, offered her money to leave town. When that didn't work, they called in favors. Had her fired from the hospital, blacklisted from other medical facilities in the area. I felt sick.
They
Destroyed her career. They destroyed everything. Her job, her reputation, her ability to work in her chosen field. All because she loved the wrong person. What did you do? I chose her. Gave up my residency, moved away with her, tried to start over somewhere else. And the LaRue reach was longer than we expected. Everywhere we went, doors closed. Jobs disappeared. Catherine couldn't get work as a nurse anywhere on the East Coast. That's insane.
that's power. Real power.
The kind that operates in boardrooms and private clubs, through handshakes and favors and carefully placed phone calls. I thought about the investigator in Mama's living room, the frozen bank accounts, the speed with which my entire support system had been dismantled.
How long did you fight? 3 years.
3 years of watching the woman I loved grow smaller and sadder and more defeated. 3 years of her blaming herself for my lost career, for the opportunities we'd both given up. What happened to her?
She
Left me, said she couldn't be the reason I'd thrown my life away. Married a mechanic in Ohio and sent me a postcard telling me not to try to find her. Uncle Beckett, I came back here with my tail between my legs, a 30-year-old man with no career, no prospects, and no Catherine. The family welcomed me back like the prodigal son, set me up in the guest house, gave me an allowance like a child. But you stayed. Where else was I going to go? I had no money, no skills outside of medicine, no references that weren't controlled by people who wanted me to fail. We sat in silence for a while, watching the late afternoon light filter through the oak trees. Uncle Beckett's story felt like a warning and a prophecy, a glimpse of what happened to LaRues who chose love over.
legacy. Do you regret it?
I asked finally. Every day, not loving Catherine, that was the best thing I ever did. But not fighting harder, not finding a way to protect her from them, not being strong enough to build something they couldn't tear down. What would you have done differently? I would have been smarter about it, more strategic. I would have built my own power base before challenging theirs. That evening, I met Luka at Forsyth Park. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. We sat on our usual bench, but everything felt different, now fragile, uncertain, under surveillance. I talked to my editor at the Kenyon Review. He said, told her I might need to delay any book deal discussions. Why? Because I can't ask you to give up everything for my writing career.
It's not fair.
What if I want to give it up?
Do you? You?
Really? Or are you just saying that because you think it's what you're supposed to say? I thought about my conversation with Uncle Beckett, about Catherine and her destroyed career, about the way love could become a weapon used against the people you cared about most. I don't know, I admitted. Your family is giving you an ultimatum. But they've also given me one, haven't they? If I really love you, I'll let you go back to them. I'll agree to the annulment and disappear from your life. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for you. Don't I get to decide that? Do you? Or are you just choosing between different versions of what other people think is best for you? The question hung between us like a challenge. Was I choosing Luka because I loved him, or because choosing him felt like rebellion against my family's control? Was I choosing independence, or was I just trading one form of dependence for another? I need more time, I said. How much time? I don't know, he nodded, understanding but disappointed. Take all the time you need. I'll be here.
As I walked
Back to the mansion that night, I wondered if that was true. How long could I ask him to wait while I figured out whether I was brave enough to choose love over legacy? How long before the uncertainty destroyed what we'd built together? The deadline was in 6 hours, and I still didn't know what I was going to do. I found Mama in the kitchen at midnight, sitting at the marble island with a cup of tea and a manila folder. She looked up when I entered, and I saw my own exhaustion reflected in her face. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from her. What's in the folder? Information about your husband. More surveillance? Background. Check. Complete financial history. Employment records, medical records, criminal background, everything. She slid the folder across the counter to me. I stared at it, not touching it, as if it might bite. Go ahead, she said. Look. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first page was a summary sheet, basic biographical information laid out in neat clinical paragraphs. Born Lucas James Moreau in Charleston, South Carolina. Mother died in childbirth, father unknown. Entered foster care at birth. The rest of the file painted a picture of systematic instability, 17 different foster homes in 18 years, 3 high schools, a brief stint in juvenile detention for shoplifting, aging out of the system with no family connections and no resources. He lied to you about his name, Mama said quietly. I looked at the page again. Lucas, not Luka, and his age. He's 31, not 28. I flipped through more pages, seeing Luka's life reduced to data points and documentation. Credit. Our EPORT showing multiple late payments, eviction notices, a bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago. Employment history that read like a catalog of desperation: dishwasher, delivery driver, night janitor, temporary warehouse work. He's had 19 different jobs in the past 5 years, Mama continued, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. Maybe he was looking for something better. Or maybe he was running from something. The medical records were even more devastating. Depression, anxiety, hospitalization for what the file delicately termed self-harm incidents. Prescription. History for antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, sleeping pills. Mental illness isn't a character flaw, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. Of course not. But it is something you should know about the man you married. I closed the folder, unable to look at any more evidence of the life Luka
had lived before he met me.
This wasn't the story he told me, not exactly lies, but significant omissions. The charming narrative of a free spirit choosing adventure over security looked different when reframed as chronic instability and unaddressed. Trauma. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand what you're choosing. This man has spent his entire adult life running from commitment, responsibility, and stability. What makes you think marriage to you will change that? People. Change? Do they? Or do they just become better at hiding who they really are? I thought about all the conversations Luka and I had shared, all the stories about his past that now seemed carefully edited. Had he been protecting my feelings, or protecting himself? Even if all of this is true, I said, it doesn't mean he doesn't love me. No, but it does mean he needs you more than he loves you. And that's a dangerous foundation for a marriage. Mama reached across the counter and took my hand. Sweetheart, I know this hurts. I know you think I'm being cruel, but I've lived long, enough to know the difference between love and need, between partnership and rescue. You don't know him. I know men like him. I know what it's like to fall in love with someone's potential instead of their reality. Something in her voice made me look at her more carefully. What do you mean? She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her tea. I mean, I was young once too. I made choices based on feelings instead of facts. Tell me. There's nothing to tell. Mama, please. I'm trying to understand why this matters so much to you. She sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 49 years. When I was your age, I thought I knew everything about love. I thought passion was more important than compatibility, that romance could overcome any obstacle. What happened? I fell in love with someone I shouldn't have. Someone my family didn't approve of.
Who? It doesn't matter now.
What matters is that I chose him over their objections, and it was the biggest mistake of my life.
I felt the ground shifting beneath me.
What kind of mistake? The kind that teaches you why families try to protect each other from bad decisions. Was this before Daddy? This was how I met your father. He was the one who helped me pick up the pieces when everything fell apart. I tried to imagine my mother as young and reckless, making choices based on passion instead of prudence. It seemed impossible. Mama had always been the picture of controlled elegance, careful consideration, appropriate behavior.
What happened?
To him, the first one? He left town with $10,000 of my money and another woman's phone number. The words hit like a physical blow. He stole from you. He took what I gave him willingly and then took more when I wasn't looking. Your father was the one who discovered the missing money, who tracked him down, who got back what could be recovered. And you married Daddy because you were grateful? I married your father because he showed me what real love looked like. Patient, steady, honest love instead of the exciting, dramatic, unstable kind that feels like a drug.
I thought about Luka's
medication history, his pattern of instability, the way our relationship had developed in secret conversations and stolen moments. Was what I felt love, or was it the rush of something forbidden and therefore exciting? That's not what this is, I said. Isn't it? Secret marriage, dramatic ultimatums, choosing romance over security. It sounds familiar to me. Luka isn't a con artist. Maybe not intentionally. But a man with his history, his financial pressures, his lack of stability, what do you think happens when he realizes how much your trust fund is worth? I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need air. I walked out to the garden, breathing in the heavy scent of magnolia and night-blooming jasmine. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light that made the familiar landscape look like a dream. Uncle Beckett's light was on in the guest house. I knocked on his door, needing to talk to someone who understood the weight of choosing love over family expectations. Couldn't sleep? He asked, letting me in. Mama showed me Luka's background check. Uncle Beckett poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed me one. And it's not good. Foster care bankruptcy, mental health issues, pattern of job instability. Basically, everything my family was afraid of. Did any of it surprise you? I thought about it. Not really. I knew he'd had a hard life. I knew he struggled with depression. I knew he moved around a lot. But seeing it all laid out in black and white felt different. Yes, because it made him seem more like a problem to be solved than a person to be loved. I nodded, grateful that he understood. That's what those reports are designed to do, Uncle Beckett continued. They reduce human beings to risk assessments and data points. They take a life full of struggle and survival and frame it as character defects. But what if the family is right? What if I am being naive? What do you think? I think I don't know anymore. I thought I knew Luka, but there are things in that file he never told me. Important things. Like what? His real age, his full name. the extent of his financial problems. Did he lie, or did he just not volunteer information? What's the difference? The difference is intent. Did he deliberately deceive you, or did he just not share things he was ashamed of? I thought about our conversations, replaying them in my mind. Luka had never claimed to be 28. I'd assumed it based on something he'd said about graduating high school. He'd never hidden his financial struggles. I'd just not asked for details. Even his name, he'd introduced himself as Luka, which was what everyone called him. I think he was protecting himself, I said finally. From what? From being judged. From being reduced to his worst moments and biggest mistakes. And now?
Now I feel like I'm judging him anyway.
Uncle Beckett was quiet for a moment, staring into his bourbon. You know what I regret most about Catherine? What? I regret that I let other people's fear and prejudice make me doubt what I knew to be true. I knew Catherine loved me for who I was, not what I had. But when the family started presenting evidence and raising questions, I began to second-guess my own instincts. What kind of evidence? Little things? She'd mentioned liking nice restaurants, so they said she was materialistic.
She'd asked
about my family, so they said she was calculating. She'd been engaged before me, so they said she was unstable. Were any of those things true? All of them were true, and none of them mattered. She liked nice restaurants because she worked hard and wanted to enjoy the results. She asked about my family because she cared about the people I cared about. She'd been engaged before because she was 30 years old and had a romantic history. But you started to doubt her. I started to doubt myself. Started wondering if I was seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. And that doubt destroyed your relationship? That doubt made me pull away from her just when she needed my support most. When the family started making her life hell, I should have been her protector. Instead, I was her interrogator. I finished my bourbon, feeling the burn all the way down.
What should I do? What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me Luka loves me.
But my gut also tells me I've been living in a bubble my whole life, and maybe I don't know enough about the real world to make good decisions. Then maybe it's time to learn. Learn what? Learn who you are when you're not a LaRue. Learn what you're capable of when you can't rely on family money. Learn whether your love for Luka is strong enough to survive the kind of pressure my love for Catherine couldn't. I walked back to the main house just as dawn was breaking over Savannah. Mama was still in the kitchen, now working on her laptop with a cup of coffee and the determined expression she wore when she was solving problems. The deadline is past, she said without looking up.
I know. Have you made your decision?
I sat down across from her, exhaustion making everything feel distant and surreal. I'm not going to annul the marriage. Mama's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Evie, but I'm also not going to run away with Luka and pretend everything is fine. What does that mean? It means I need to figure out who I am without your money and without your protection. I need to know if I can survive on my own before I ask someone else to survive with me. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I'm going to find my own place, get my own job, and see if I can build a life that doesn't depend on the LaRue Trust Fund.
And Luka?
Luka and I are going to have some very honest conversations about our past, our present, and our future. And if we can't handle that level of honesty, then maybe you're right about us. Mama looked up from her laptop, and for the first time in 24 hours, she seemed genuinely surprised by something I'd said. You're willing to lose everything just to prove a point? I'm willing to risk everything to find out who I really am. 3 weeks into my experiment in independence, I was living in a studio apartment above a vintage clothing store in the Arts District, working part-time at a gallery and discovering that ramen really could be a food group. My hands were raw. From washing dishes at the gallery's opening night events, my bank account balance was terrifying, and I'd never been more exhausted in my life. I'd also never felt more like myself. Luka and I had been meeting twice a week for what we started calling honesty sessions, conversations where we laid our histories bare, examining every assumption we made about each other. He told me about the shoplifting charge, desperate hunger at 16, the depression, undiagnosed trauma from childhood instability, and the real reason he moved so often, afraid to get attached to places or people who might disappear. I'd told him about the trust fund larger than he'd imagined, my complete lack of real-world skills, embarrassing but true, and my growing suspicion that I'd married him partly to rebel against my family. Uncomfortable, but probably accurate. Are we going to make it? I'd asked him after a particularly brutal session where we dissected our entire relationship.
I don't know, he'd answered.
But at least now we're working with honest information. It was progress, even if it didn't feel romantic. That Thursday afternoon, I was cleaning paintbrushes at the gallery when my phone rang. Uncle Beckett's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. He preferred face-to-face conversations. Or handwritten notes. Evie, can you come home? It's important. I can't. I'm working until 6. This can't wait. Something in his voice made me set down the brushes. What's wrong? Your mother collapsed this morning. She's at the hospital. The world tilted sideways. What? She's stable? But there's something you need to know before you see her. Something about why she's been so afraid of your marriage. I left work immediately, taking a cab I couldn't afford to Forsyth Park. Uncle Beckett was waiting for me in the garden, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Tell me, I said. Your mother made me promise never to tell you this. But given everything that's happened, I think you deserve the truth. He led me to the guest house, where he'd spread old photographs and documents across his dining table like evidence in a trial. Look at this, he said, handing me a photograph. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like me, same dark hair, same green eyes, same stubborn jawline. She was wearing a simple wedding dress and smiling at someone outside the frame. Who is this? Your mother. At her first wedding. I stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the radiant young woman with the controlled, elegant mother I knew. Her first wedding? She was 24. Same age you are now? Uncle Beckett handed me another photograph, the same woman with a young man who was clearly not my father. He had dark hair and an easy smile, and they looked at each other with the kind of intensity that made the camera seem intrusive. Who is he? His name was James Moreau. The name hit like a physical blow. Moreau, like Luka? James Moreau was Luka's father. I sat down heavily, the photographs falling from my hands. That's impossible. Luka doesn't know. James disappeared when Luka was born, leaving his mother to raise the child alone. She died in childbirth complications, and Luka went into foster care. You're saying Luka's... I couldn't finish the sentence. Your stepbrother. Technically, your mother's first husband's son. The room was spinning. I grabbed the edge of the table, trying to make sense of what Uncle Beckett was telling. Start from the beginning, I said. Uncle Beckett sat across from me, his face grave. Your mother fell in love with James Moreau when she was at college in Charleston. He was older, charming, from a working-class family. Everything her parents disapproved of. Like Luka. Exactly. Like Luka, she married him in secret just like you did. I picked up the wedding photograph again, studying my mother's face. She looked so young, so hopeful, so convinced that love could overcome any obstacle. What happened? James was everything. Your grandparents said he was unstable, unreliable, probably more interested in the LaRue money than in your mother. He spent her trust fund on bad investments and gambling debts. When she got pregnant, he panicked. She was pregnant. For about 6 weeks, she miscarried, and James blamed her. Said she'd lost the baby on purpose because she didn't want to be tied to him. Did she? I don't know. I don't think she knows. The miscarriage was traumatic, and James's accusations made it worse. By the time she recovered physically, he'd emptied their joint bank account and disappeared. I thought about the broken, hollow look in my mother's eyes whenever she talked about mistakes and bad decisions. How long were they married? 8 months. Your mother spent 2 years trying to track him down, partly to get her money back and partly because she still loved him. She hired investigators, followed leads, spent everything she had left trying to find him. And she found him living with another woman in New Orleans. The woman was pregnant. With Luka, your mother confronted James, demanding he return at least some of the money he'd stolen. He laughed at her, said he owed her nothing, that she'd been a spoiled rich girl playing at real life. Uncle Beckett handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping. 3 months later, this appeared in the Charleston paper. The headline read, "Local woman dies in childbirth, father flees town." Below it was a brief article about a young woman named Marie Moreau who had died giving birth to a son. The father, James Moreau, had left town immediately after the birth, leaving no forwarding address and no provision for the child's care. Mama knew about the baby. She knew about the baby. She knew James had abandoned his son the same way he'd abandoned her. And she knew that child was going into foster care with no family, no resources, no protection. What did she do? Uncle Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Nothing. She came home to Savannah, married your father, and tried to pretend James. Moreau had never existed. She did nothing to help Luka. What could she do? She was 26 years old, emotionally destroyed, financially ruined. She just lost a baby of her own and was trying to rebuild her life. James's son was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I stared at the photographs spread across the table, my mother young and hopeful, James Moreau charming and dangerous. A newspaper clipping about a woman who died bringing Luka into the world. Does Mama know who Luka is? She suspected from the moment you first mentioned his name. The age was right, the city was right, and the resemblance to James' eyes significant. I thought about Luka's face, trying to see James Moreau in his features. The dark hair, the easy smile when he relaxed, the way he moved with unconscious grace details, I'd found attractive without understanding why they seemed familiar. She had him investigated to confirm it? Yes, once she saw the photographs of your wedding, she knew for certain. Luka's middle name is James, after his father. His mother named him Lucas James Moreau, and she never told him? Never reached out? What would she have said? Hello, I'm the woman your father robbed and abandoned before you were born? How would that have helped anyone? I understood now why Mama had reacted so violently to my marriage, why she'd been willing to freeze my accounts and cut me off completely. In her mind, I wasn't just marrying an inappropriate man, I was repeating her greatest mistake with the son of the man who destroyed her first chance at happiness. She thinks Luka is like his father. She thinks genetics and desperation make a dangerous combination. But he's not James. He's nothing like James. Are you sure about that? The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about Luka's financial history. His pattern of moving from place to place, his careful way of talking about the past. I thought about how quickly he'd married me, how he'd seemed almost too good to be true. Yes, I said finally. I'm Sure, even knowing what you know now, especially knowing what I know now, Uncle Beckett smiled sadly. Then you're braver than your mother was, or maybe you're just younger. I need to see her. She's at Memorial, room 314. I stood up, gathering. The photographs. Can I take these? Take whatever you need. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. I found Mama's room and knocked softly before entering. She was awake, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed, her perfect hair mussed in her. Face pale without makeup. Evie. Her voice was rough. You came. Of course I came. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Uncle Beckett told me. Told you what? About James Moreau. About your first marriage. About Luka's father. Mama closed her eyes. I asked him not to. He thought I deserved to know. Do you? Or would you have been happier not knowing? I pulled the wedding photograph from my purse and placed it on her bedside table. You look happy here. I was completely, devastatingly happy. I thought I'd found my soulmate. What changed? Reality. James wasn't who I thought he was. Or maybe he was exactly who he said he was, and I just refused to see it. And you think Luka is the same? I think desperation makes people do desperate things. I think when you're poor and struggling and someone offers you a way out, it's hard to separate love from opportunity. Luka didn't know about the trust fund when he married me. Are you sure? I'm sure. Then maybe you're luckier than I was. Or maybe you're making the same mistake I made seeing what you want to see instead of what's really there. I took her hand, noticing how thin it felt, how fragile. What happened to you today? Why are you here? Panic attack. The stress of the past few weeks, the worry about you, the memories I've been trying to keep buried, it all caught up with me. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for living your life. Be smart about it. I am being smart. I'm learning to take care of myself, to make my own decisions based on my own experiences instead of other people's fears. And Luka and I are figuring it out. Honestly, this time. Mama was quiet for a long moment, staring at her own wedding photograph. I never told your father about James until after we were married. I was afraid he'd think I was damaged goods. What did he say when you told him? He said everyone has a past, and what mattered was the future we were building together. Smart man, the smartest. He saved me from becoming bitter and cynical, made me believe in love again. Then trust me to be as smart as you were when you chose him. I stayed with her until visiting hours ended, talking about James and Luka and the strange twist of fate that had brought the past into our present. When I left, she looked more peaceful than she had in weeks. Outside the hospital, I called Luka and asked him to meet me at Forsyth Park. It was time for the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Luka was waiting by our usual bench when I arrived. At Forsyth Park, but I led him deeper into the shadows under the oak trees, away from the streetlights and evening joggers. What I had to tell him required privacy and darkness, the kind of conversation that could only happen when you couldn't see the other person's face clearly enough to predict their reaction. You sounded strange on the phone, he said, settling beside me on the grass. Is everything okay? I pulled the photograph from my purse, the one of James Moreau and my mother on their wedding day. My hands were shaking as I handed it to him. Do you recognize this man? Luka squinted at the photo in the dim light, then used his phone's flashlight to see it better. I watched his face change as he studied the image, saw the moment recognition. Hit? He looks like ... Luka's voice trailed off. Like you. He looks exactly like you. Who is he? His name was James Moreau. He was married to my mother 25 years ago. Luka stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked at me. with an expression I couldn't read. Morrow isn't exactly a common name. No, it isn't. Are you saying this man is related to me? I'm saying this man is your father. The words hung in the humid air between us like a confession. Luka continued staring at the photograph, his breathing shallow and quick. That's impossible. His full name was James Christopher Morrow. He was from Charleston, worked construction, had problems with gambling and debt. He married my mother when she was 24, stole her money, and disappeared when she miscarried their baby. You're making this up. 3 months later, he got another woman pregnant in New Orleans. Her name was Mary. She died giving birth. To a son she named Lucas James Morrow. Luka's hands were shaking now. How do you know this? Because my family has been investigating you since the day they found out about our marriage. Because my mother recognized your last name and had you researched. Because she's been living with this secret for 25 years. She knew who I was when she met me. She suspected. The investigation confirmed it. Luka stood up abruptly, pacing away from me toward the fountain. I followed him, watching as he processed the information that had just blown apart everything he thought he knew about himself and our relationship. My father, he said finally. The man I've spent 31 years wondering about, imagining, sometimes hating he was married to your mother. Yes, he stole from her. Yes, and then he abandoned my mother and me. Yes, Luka turned to face me, and in the streetlight, his expression was wild with something between rage and despair. Do you understand what this means? I understand that it's complicated. Complicated? Evie, your mother watched my father destroy her life, and then she watched him abandon me. She knew I existed. She knew I was in foster care, getting moved. From home to home, aging out of the system with nothing. She was 26 years old and emotionally destroyed. What could she have done? Something. Anything. She could have made sure I wasn't completely alone in the world. I thought about the newspaper clipping, about my mother's miscarriage and James's cruel accusations, about the young woman who'd been so broken by betrayal that she'd spent 2 years obsessively searching for a man who'd laughed at her pain. She was barely surviving herself. She was rich. Even after he stole from her, she still had more resources than most people ever see. Money isn't the same thing as emotional capacity. No, but it could have bought therapy support, help for a kid who was getting shuffled through a system that didn't give a damn about him. Luka's anger was building, and I could see years of abandonment and resentment crystallizing around this. New information. Every foster home that hadn't worked out, every social worker who'd seen him as a case file, every birthday he'd spent wondering why his parents hadn't wanted him, all of it now had a face and a name and a connection to the woman who'd become his mother-in-law. There's more, I said quietly. More what? She thinks you're like him. Like James. She thinks you married me for the same reasons he married her. For money. For security. For a way out of whatever life you were living before. Luka laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Maybe she's right. Don't say that. Why not? Think about it, Evie. I'm a 31-year-old man with no family, no real career, no money, no stability. And then I meet you young, beautiful, rich, kind. Everything I've never had and always wanted. You didn't know I was rich when you met me. I knew you were different. I knew you didn't worry about money the way I do. I knew you came from a world where things just worked out, where people had safety nets and second chances. That doesn't mean you married me for money, doesn't it? How can I be sure? How can either of us be sure knowing what we know now? I wanted to argue with him, to list all the reasons I knew he loved me for myself and not my bank account. But The doubt in his voice was echoing my own fears, the questions that had been growing stronger with each revelation about our family's intertwined history. "We can be sure because we know each other?" I said, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. "Do we? I mean, really?" "We've been together for 8 months, and we just found out we're connected by one of the most traumatic events in both our families' histories. What else don't we know?" I thought about all the things I'd learned about Luka in recent weeks, his real age, his financial history, his struggles with depression, all the careful editing he'd done of his own story, all the assumptions I made based on limited information. "Maybe that's why we need to figure it out," I said. "Maybe this is exactly why I moved out of my mother's house and you turned down that book deal opportunity. So we can know for sure whether what we have is real, and what if it isn't?" The question hung between us like a sword. What if our entire relationship had been built on subconscious patterns of damage and need? What if I'd chosen Luka because he reminded me of family dysfunction, and he'd chosen me because I represented everything he'd never had? Then we deal with that honestly too. How? I don't know yet. We walked home in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we reached his apartment, Luka turned to me with an expression that made my chest ache. "I need some time to process this." "How much time?" "I don't know. This changes everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about why I've made the choices I've made. It doesn't change how I feel about you." "Are you sure?" "Because I'm not sure how I feel about anything right now." I wanted to argue, to convince him that love could survive this kind of revelation. But looking at his face, at the features that so clearly echoed his father's, at the pain and confusion in his eyes, understood that he needed space to figure out who he was in light of this new information. "Okay," I said. "Take the time you need. What will you do?" "I'll keep learning how to be myself without anyone else's money or protection. And I'll wait for you to figure out who you are too." I kissed him goodbye, tasting salt from tears I didn't realize I'd been crying. Then I walked back to my studio apartment, past the late-night bars and art galleries, through the neighborhood where I'd been slowly building a life that belonged to me. At home, I spread Uncle Beckett's photographs across my small kitchen table, studying the faces of people who'd loved and betrayed each other decades before I was born. James Moreau looked so much like Luka that it was unsettling. The same easy charm, the same unconscious grace, the same smile that could make you forget to ask the right questions. But there were differences too. Something harder in James's eyes, something more calculating in his expression. Luka's face, even in his most guarded moments, held a vulnerability that his father seemed to lack. I called Talia, needing to talk to someone who knew me well enough to tell me the truth. "Girl, you sound like hell," she said by way of greeting. "I feel like hell." I told her everything, the hospital visit, Uncle Beckett's revelations, Luka's reaction to learning about his father. She listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage at appropriate moments. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. Wait, I guess. See if our relationship can survive this level of family drama." "Do you want it to survive?" "Yes, no, maybe. I honestly don't know anymore. What does your gut tell you?" "My gut tells me I love him. But my gut also tells me we might be too damaged by our family's history to build something healthy together." "And your brain?" "My brain tells me I'm 24 years old and maybe I don't have to figure out my entire future this week." Talia laughed. "Now you're talking sense. Look, this situation is insane, like soap opera level insane. But underneath all the family drama and hidden connections, there's a simple question. Do you and Luka make each other better people? I think so. When we're not drowning in revelations about our screwed up families, then maybe that's what matters. Not whether your love story's complicated, but whether it's worth fighting for. After we hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and tried to imagine a future where Luka and I found a way through this maze of family history and personal trauma. It seemed impossible and inevitable at the same time, like we were characters in a story that had been written long before we were born. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mama. Feeling better today. Would like to talk when you're ready. I spent the morning at the gallery, helping set up for a new exhibition of local artists. The work was physical and demanding, requiring me to focus on immediate tasks instead of long-term. Questions about love and family and whether it was possible to escape the patterns that had shaped your parents' lives. Around noon, I walked to the hospital to see Mama. She was sitting up in bed, looking more like herself, though still fragile around the edges. How are you feeling? Like, I've been hit by a truck carrying 25 years of secrets, she said, but better than yesterday. I told Luka about his father. How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. He's angry, confused, questioning everything you thought. He knew about himself and our relationship. Mama nodded. I was afraid of that. Were you, or were you hoping for it? The question surprised her. What do you mean? I mean, did you tell me this story because you thought it would help me understand Luka better, or because you thought it would drive us apart? Mama was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Savannah skyline. I told you because I thought you deserved to know the truth. What you do with that truth is up to you. But you're hoping I'll choose to end the marriage. I'm hoping you'll choose wisely based on complete information instead of romantic fantasies. And if I choose Luka, even knowing what I know now, then I'll try to support your decision even if I don't understand it. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all I saw was exhaustion and the kind of love that sometimes manifests as fear. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay, if you could go back and change what happened with James, would you? You mean, would I not marry him? I mean, would you handle it differently? Would you be braver, smarter, more willing to fight for what you wanted? Mama was quiet for a long time. I don't know. James really did hurt me, really did steal from me, really did abandon his responsibilities. Maybe there was no way to handle it that wouldn't have ended badly, but maybe there was. Maybe some people are just meant to be cautionary tales instead of happy endings. I left the hospital more confused than when I'd arrived. On the bus ride home, I thought about patterns and choices, about the ways family history shaped but didn't necessarily determine personal destiny. I thought about Uncle Beckett's regrets, and Mama's fears and Luka's anger, mostly. I thought about whether love could survive the weight of so much complicated history. That evening, I painted for the first time in weeks. I mixed colors that had no names, the gray-green of Spanish moss, the gold-pink of Savannah sunsets, the deep blue of uncertainty and hope. I painted abstract shapes that might have been hearts or storms, or the complicated geography of family. Loyalty dawned as I worked. I realized I was painting my way toward a decision. Not about Luka specifically, but about what kind of person I wanted to be when faced with difficult choices and uncertain outcomes that I wanted to be braver than my mother had. Then at 24, I wanted to be wiser than Uncle Beckett had been when he let doubt destroy his relationship with Catherine. I wanted to be more honest than my family's tradition of keeping secrets and controlling outcomes. I wanted to be the kind of person who could love someone completely while still maintaining her own identity and independence. Whether that person could also be married to Luka Moreau remained to be seen. 5 days later, Luka called and asked me to meet him at the courthouse where we'd gotten married. The symmetry felt ominous. Either we were going to reaffirm our commitment in the place where it had begun, or we were going to end it in the same location. I spent the entire bus ride trying to prepare for either possibility. He was waiting on the steps, looking like he hadn't slept much. The easy charm that had first attracted me was gone, replaced by something raw and more honest. When he saw me approaching, he stood up with the careful movements of someone who'd been sitting in the same position for hours. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Of course." We sat on the courthouse steps where we'd kissed as newlyweds 3 months earlier. The spot felt like sacred ground and a crime scene simultaneously. "I've been thinking," he said, "about James, about your mother, about everything that happened before we were born. And I realized something. I've spent my entire adult life running from anything that felt permanent or committed because I was afraid of being abandoned again." I nodded, understanding where this was going. But marrying you wasn't running away from commitment. It was running towards something I'd never had: family, stability, belonging. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. It isn't unless you're not honest about your motivations. Unless you let need masquerade as love. My stomach dropped. Is that what you did? I don't know. That's the problem. I've been so desperate for connection my whole life that I might not be able to tell the difference between loving someone and needing them. They're not mutually exclusive. No, but they should be distinguishable. I thought about my own motivations, about the ways I used Luka to rebel against my family's expectations, to prove my independence, to feel like someone other than the dutiful LaRue daughter. I haven't been completely honest about my motivations. Either, I said. What do you mean? I mean, maybe I married you partly because you represented everything my family disapproved of. Maybe I was more in love with the idea of choosing my own path than I was with you specifically. Luka smiled sadly. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The abandoned foster kid and the rebellious rich girl, both using each other to work out our family issues. Is that what we were doing? Some of it, yeah. But not all of it. How can you tell the difference? Because I know how I felt when I thought I might lose you. Not when your family threatened to cut you off. That felt like a challenge, like something to fight against. But when I thought about what it would mean to live without you, without your laugh and your terrible cooking, and the way you cry at art exhibits, that felt like losing something essential. You cry at art exhibits too. I cry at everything. I'm emotionally unstable, remember? You're emotionally honest? There's a difference. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching tourists and courthouse employees move through their ordinary days. Everything felt simultaneously momentous and mundane, the way life-changing conversations often do. I found something, Luka said, pulling a folder from his backpack, about James. I took the folder with trembling hands. More background information? Medical. Records. Psychiatric evaluation from when he was arrested for fraud in Texas, 2 years after he left my mother. I opened the folder and scanned the document's psychological assessment, clinical notes, diagnostic impressions. The language was technical and clinical, but the picture it painted was clear. James Moreau had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and substance abuse issues. He was a sociopath, I said. Clinically speaking, yes. Incapable of genuine emotional attachment, manipulative, with no empathy for the people he hurt. Luka, I'm not him. I know you're not. Do you? Because I've been wondering. I've been thinking about all the times I've moved, all the jobs. I've quit, all the relationships I've ended when they got too serious. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Maybe I inherited more than just his looks. I closed the folder and took his hands.
You're nothing like him.
You're incapable of using people the way he did. You feel too much, care too deeply, worry too much about everyone else's feelings. How can you be sure? Because I've watched you interact with everyone from your coworkers to strangers on the street. Because you tip servers 50% when you can barely afford groceries. Because you cried when you accidentally stepped on a snail.
That's not scientific evidence.
It's better than scientific evidence. It's daily life evidence. Luka was quiet for a moment, studying our joined hands. What about you?
How do you...
No, you're not just repeating your mother's pattern of falling for inappropriate men. Because I'm not my mother, and you're not your father. How can you be sure? Because I've spent the last month learning who I am without my family's money and protection. Because I know the difference between needing someone and loving them now.
And I love you.
Not because you represent rebellion or independence or anything else. Because you're kind and funny and talented, and you make me want to be a better person. Even knowing everything you know now.
Especially knowing everything I know now.
Luka pulled me closer, and for the first time in days, his smile reached his eyes. So, what do we do about it? We start over.
Honestly, this time, how?
We have the conversation we should have had before we got married. We talk about what we actually want from marriage, from each other, from life. We figure out if we're compatible as partners, not just as lovers. That sounds terrifying. Everything worth doing is terrifying. We spent the next 3 hours on those courthouse steps, having the most honest conversation of our relationship. We talked about money and family and career goals, and whether we wanted children and how we handled conflict, and what we needed from each other to feel secure and loved. Some of the answers were easy. We both wanted to travel, preferred small groups to large parties, believed in supporting each other's creative ambitions. Some were more challenging. I wanted financial stability, and he was willing to take risks for artistic opportunities. He needed more physical affection than I was naturally inclined to give. I needed more intellectual conversation than his depression. Sometimes allowed him to provide, but none of the differences felt insurmountable. They felt like the normal work of two people learning to build a life together. There's something else, Luka said as the sun began to set over Charleston. The literary agent? She wants to represent me, and she thinks I should write about this about James, about growing up in foster care, about finding out my father was connected to my wife's family. How do you feel about that? Terrified, excited, like it might be the most important thing I ever write. It sounds like you should do it. It would mean digging into family history that hurts people. Your mother, your uncle, probably you. It would also mean telling your story honestly, and maybe helping other people who've been through similar experiences. You'd be okay with that? With me writing about your family's secrets? I'd be proud
of you for it.
As we walked back toward downtown Charleston, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The complicated history of our families was still there, but it felt like context rather than destiny. We were choosing each other with full knowledge of where we'd come from and what we'd inherited, but also with commitment to creating something different. There's one more thing, I said as we reached the bus station. What's that? I want to introduce you to my mother, properly this time. Are you sure that's a good idea? I think it's necessary. She needs to see that you're not James, and you need to see that she's not the villain in this story. What if she still thinks I'm after your money? Then we'll prove her wrong, together. The bus ride back to Savannah felt like a journey between two different versions of our story. The old version built on secrets and assumptions and family, fears, And the new version, built on honesty and choice and the belief that love could survive even the most complicated family history. When we arrived at the mansion that evening, Mama was in the garden, deadheading roses in the fading light. She looked up as we approached, and I saw her taking the sight of us together, hands linked, faces calm, clearly having made some kind of peace with ourselves and each other. "Mama," I said, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Luka Moreau." She set down her pruning shears and studied him for a long moment. I could see her looking for traces of James in his face, but also looking for something else, some sign of the man I'd chosen to love. "Mr. Moreau," she said finally, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. LaRue."
I do.
I let my fear of the past interfere with my daughter's future.
That wasn't fair to either of you.
Your fear was understandable, given what you'd been through. Mama smiled, a real smile, not the careful social expression she usually wore. "Evie says you're a writer." "I'm trying to be." "She also says you're planning to write about James, about what happened to your mother and to me. Only if you're comfortable with that. I know it's painful history. It is painful. But maybe it's time for the truth to be told. Maybe keeping secrets has done more harm than good." As the three of us walked toward the house together, I felt something shift in the complicated dynamics that had defined the past months. Not resolution, exactly, but the beginning of understanding. The acknowledgement that real love, required both courage and honesty, both forgiveness and commitment to do better. We had dinner together in the kitchen, the three of us, and Uncle Beckett, who'd appeared with a bottle of wine and his usual gentle wisdom. The conversation was careful but warm, the beginning of what might eventually become a real relationship between Luka and my family. Later, as Luka and I walked back to his apartment under the Spanish moss and starlight, I thought about the choices that had brought us to this moment. The secret marriage that had seemed so romantic and rebellious. The family confrontation that had forced us to examine our motivations. The revelations about our shared history that had nearly destroyed us. All of it had been necessary. All of it had brought us to this place where we could choose each other with full knowledge and honest intention. "So," Lucas said as we reached his door, "what happens now?" "Now we figure out how to be married for real. How to build something together that's ours, not just a reaction to our family's expectations."
Or fears.
Think we can do it? I think we're already doing it. 2 years later, I stood in the carriage house, my studio again, after months of negotiation with Mama about independence and family support, putting the finishing touches on a painting that would be part of my first solo exhibition. The canvas was large, full of the colors I'd been mixing that day when everything started, titanium white and cadmium yellow, with hints of blue creeping in from the edges. But now the blue wasn't an intrusion, it was integration, the way uncertainty and hope could coexist in the same space. Through the windows, I could see Luka in the garden with Mama, both of them bent over a laptop as they discussed his book manuscript. The sights still surprise me sometimes, my mother and my husband as collaborators, united in their commitment to telling the truth about James Moreau and the ripple effects of his damage across 2 generations. Breathing Room, a memoir, would be published in the fall. The literary agent had been right. It was the most important thing Luka had ever written. An unflinching examination of abandonment, foster care, and the ways we inherit both trauma and resilience from the people who shape us. The book had already received interest from publishers and film producers, though Luka remained cautiously optimistic about commercial success. "You're never really sure if anyone wants to read about other people's family dysfunction," he told me the night before, when the anxiety about publication had kept him awake. "Everyone wants to read about family dysfunction," I'd answered. It's why soap operas exist. My phone buzzed with a text from Talia. Opening night in 3 days.
You!
Ready to be a real artist? I texted back. As ready as anyone can be for public vulnerability. The exhibition was called Legacy, and it featured paintings that explored the intersection of family history and personal choice. Some were abstract representations of emotions, the suffocating weight of expectations, the exhilaration of defying. Then the complex love that could coexist with resentment. Others were more literal portraits of Mama and Uncle Beckett, landscapes of Savannah that captured both its beauty and its capacity for keeping secrets. The centerpiece was a large painting. I titled Inheritance. It showed two figures, one dark-haired, one light standing at a crossroads where multiple paths diverged. The figures were painted in loose, impressionistic strokes that made them universal rather than specific, but anyone who knew our story would understand the autobiographical elements. That one's going to make people cry, Uncle Beckett had said when he'd seen it the week before. Good, I'd answered. Art should make people feel something. Uncle Beckett had become an unexpected source of support during the process of creating the exhibition. His own experience with choosing love over family expectations had given him unique insight into the themes I was exploring. He'd also become Luka's unofficial therapist, helping him work through the complicated emotions that had emerged during the writing process. Your uncle's a good man, Luka had told me after one of their long conversations on the porch. I understand now why you trust his judgment. He's seen what happens when you let fear make your decisions, I'd said. And he doesn't want anyone else to make his mistakes. The opening reception was scheduled for Friday night. The entire gallery would be devoted to my work, with prices that still made me slightly dizzy to think about. I'd sold 3 pieces during the preview, including one to a collector from Atlanta who'd driven down specifically to see the show. You're not just the LaRue heiress playing at being an artist anymore, the gallery owner had told me. You're an artist who happens to be a LaRue. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. Mama appeared in the studio doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression she got when she was processing complicated emotions. The final guest list came in, she said, handing me a cup. 237 confirmed attendees. That's a lot of people. Margaret's coming. I looked up from my painting, surprised. My cousin and I had maintained polite distance. Since the intervention 2 years ago, our relationship still strained by her role in the family's attempt to control my choices. How do you feel about that? Nervous, but also curious. I think she's finally realized that your marriage surviving might be good for all of us. How so? Because it proves that LaRue winning can choose love without losing everything. That may be... The family's definition of appropriate has been too narrow. I thought about Margaret's engagement to the politician, a safe, sensible choice that looked good in the society pages, but might not have much to do with actual compatibility or affection. Is she happy? I don't think she knows how to be happy. She knows how to be successful, how to be appropriate, how to meet expectations. But happy, Mama shrugged. Maybe your example will teach her something. We drank our coffee and comfortable. Silence, watching Luka and Uncle Beckett through the window. They were laughing about something. Probably one of Uncle Beckett's stories about his medical school days or Luka's tales from his various odd jobs. I have something for you, Mama said, pulling a small wrapped box from her purse. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet set with emeralds, the same one I'd seen in photographs of my grandmother and great-grandmother. LaRue women had worn it for 4 generations, always passing it down on significant occasions. Mama, I can't take this. Yes, you can. You've earned it. How? by proving that you can honor your family's legacy while still creating your own path, by showing that tradition doesn't have to mean stagnation. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of choice simultaneously. What does this make me? It makes you the next generation of LaRue women, the one who changed the story. That evening, Luka and I walked through downtown Savannah, past the squares and historic buildings, toward the gallery where my work would be displayed starting tomorrow. The city felt different now, less like a beautiful prison and more like a home I'd chosen. Nervous about tomorrow? Luka asked. Terrified. Good terrified or bad terrified. The good kind. The kind that means I'm doing something that matters. To me, we stopped in front of the gallery, peering through the windows at my paintings hanging on the walls. Seeing them in that context, professionally lit, carefully arranged, priced and cataloged, made them feel both more important and more vulnerable. They look good, Luka said. They look like they belong to someone else. They belong to you. The you who was brave enough to paint them. I thought about the woman who'd started the first painting 2 years ago, mixing colors in a studio she was about to lose, married to a man she was still learning to know. That woman felt like both a stranger and a younger sister, recognizable, but distant, someone I'd outgrown. Do you ever regret it? I asked. The secrecy, the drama, the way everything got so complicated? I regret the secrecy, but not the rest of it. Even the part where we almost broke up, especially that part. We needed to almost lose each other to understand what we actually had. As we walked home, I thought about the different kinds of love I'd witnessed and experienced. The dramatic, unstable kind that had destroyed James and my mother's marriage. The careful, strategic kind that had characterized my parents' relationship after Mama's first heartbreak. The patient, enduring kind that Uncle Beckett still carried for Catherine after all these years. And then there was what Luka and I had built, something that incorporated elements of all those types, but belonged entirely to us. Passionate but stable, chosen but committed, romantic but realistic. I love you, I said as we reached his apartment, our apartment now, though I still kept the studio for working. I love you too, he said. The real you, not the idea of you. How can you tell the difference? Because the real you leaves coffee, rings on the furniture and cries during commercials and paints until 3 a.m. when you're working through something emotional. That's not very romantic. It's better than romantic. It's true. The opening reception was everything I'd hoped for and more than I'd expected. The gallery was packed with friends, family, art collectors, and curious strangers who'd read about the exhibition in the Arts Weekly. I spent the evening moving from painting to painting, explaining my choices, and listening to people's interpretations of my work. Margaret surprised me by buying the painting of Uncle Beckett, saying it reminded her of the importance of forgiveness. Mama spent most of the evening standing in front of Inheritance, occasionally wiping away tears when she thought no one was looking. The most unexpected moment came when a young woman approached me near the end of the evening. She was about my age, with the kind of carefully constructed appearance that suggested she was working very hard to seem older and more sophisticated than she felt. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Sarah Chun. I read about your story in the paper, about how you chose love over family expectations." "Nice to meet you, Sarah." "I'm engaged to someone my family doesn't approve of. They think he's not successful enough, not ambitious enough, not right for me." I studied her face, seeing my own uncertainty from 2 years ago reflected in her expression. "What do you think?" "I think I love him. But I also think my family might be right about some things. He doesn't have much money, he's not career-focused, he's perfectly happy with a simple life. And you're not? I don't know." I thought I wanted more, but when I'm with him, simple feels like enough. I thought about the advice I would have wanted to hear 2 years ago when I was standing in my own crossroads moment. The question isn't whether your family is right or wrong about him. The question is whether you can be happy with the life you'd build together. How do you know? You don't completely. But you can get closer to knowing by being honest about what you actually want, not what you think you should want.
Your family?
Came around eventually, some of them. But even if they hadn't, it would have been worth it. How can you be sure? I looked across the gallery to where Luka was talking with Uncle Beckett, both of them animated and laughing. Then I looked at Mama, who was showing one of my paintings to a potential buyer, proud and protective in equal measure, because I know who I am now. Because I learned that love isn't about choosing between family and partner, it's about creating a family that includes the people who support your happiness. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, then moved on to look at more paintings. I hoped she'd find whatever clarity she was looking for, though I knew that kind of certainty couldn't be borrowed from someone. Elsa's story. As the evening wound down and the last guests filtered out, I found myself alone in the gallery with my work. The paintings looked different now that they'd been seen and discussed and interpreted by dozens of strangers. They felt more like communication and less like private therapy, more like art and less like autobiography. Ready to go home? Luka asked, appearing beside me with my purse and the small stack of business cards I collected from potential buyers.
Ready? How does it feel?
Like the end of something and the beginning of something else. What kind of something else?
I
looked around the gallery one more time at the visual record of everything we've been through and worked toward.
Like whatever comes next.
Outside, Savannah's summer air wrapped around us like a warm embrace. We walked slowly through the historic district, past the squares where I'd met Luka for clandestine conversations, past the courthouse where we'd gotten married in secret, past the mansion where I'd grown up thinking I knew how my life was supposed to unfold. All of it felt like prologue, now necessary background for the story we were still writing together. A story that honored our family's histories while refusing to be limited by them. A story that proved love could be both chosen and lasting, both passionate and sustainable.
What are you thinking about?
Luka asked as we climbed the stairs to
our apartment. Double quotes, just all of it.
How far we've come, how much we've learned, how many things had to go wrong before they could go right. Any regrets about marrying you in secret?
About any of it.
I thought about the question seriously, considering all the pain and uncertainty and family drama we'd endured. The frozen bank accounts and the ultimatums and the revelations about James Morrow. The weeks of doubt and the near breakup and the slow, difficult work of learning to trust each other completely. No, I said finally. No regrets. Even about the secrecy? Even about the secrecy. We weren't ready to define our relationship publicly until we understood it privately.
And now? Now I'd marry you again.
In front of everyone this time. Luka smiled, the kind of smile that had first made me fall in love with him.
Is that a proposal?
It's a promise that whatever comes next, we'll face it together, honestly this time. Honestly, he agreed, and kissed me under the Spanish moss and starlight, in the city where we'd found each other and lost ourselves and built something entirely new from the pieces of our complicated histories. 2 years after our secret wedding, we were finally ready to be married for real. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.